All right, in this video, we're going to look at the 2019 FRQ number 1 question from the second set of these questions. So if you haven't seen any of the other FRQ practice that I've done, there's a few others that I've got out there, plenty more to come. So make sure you're taking a look at those as well if you want a little extra practice. All right, so question 1, assume that the economy of Heartland is currently operating above full employment. Now, this is the first part of the question that you really need to address and make sure you get right. Otherwise, everything else is going to be a little off. So what does it mean to be producing above full employment? Full employment is when you're producing at potential GDP. So if you are producing at a level above full employment, that means that you're producing greater than potential GDP. So the real GDP is going to be greater than the long-run aggregate supply or potential GDP. Make sure you know how to identify where the economy is actually at. These questions always start out this way. So draw a correctly labeled graph on the short-run aggregate supply, long-run aggregate supply, and aggregate demand curves, and show each of the following. So you have to draw this model out. Make sure you got your labels, your axes, price level on the vertical axis, real GDP on the horizontal axis, and you use the labels that they tell you. If they don't give you labels, use something that makes sense. You know, these are perfect labels to use that they've given us. Y as our real output and PL1 as our price level here. So we've got this all under control. The next thing that we need to know is the full employment output, labeled as YF. So in this case, you need to identify where the long-run aggregate supply curve is, our potential GDP. Where is that full employment level going to be? We're producing above full employment, so real is going to be above potential. So our long-run aggregate supply curve should be before the real GDP. So this is it for part 1 of this question. Now, part B, assume that the central bank and the government do not take any policy actions to close the output gap. In this situation, we want to see the auto adjustment of the economy, the long-run automatic adjustment of it without any fiscal or monetary policy taking effect. So on our graph, show how the economy automatically adjusts in the long run and label the new equilibrium price PL2. So auto adjustment usually has to do with input prices or wages or sticky prices, the things that take a little bit longer to adjust. The price of most goods go up, producers want to produce more, and they can because wages usually lag behind the other prices. So we refer to them as sticky prices. So what usually happens is we have a leftward shifting aggregate supply curve in this case. We start in the inflationary gap. As those price levels start to adjust, it becomes more costly to produce the goods. Producers start to realize that, and the supply curve starts to shift to the left. This brings the price level up, but it also brings us back to potential GDP, back to full employment. So we're actually going to see an increase in unemployment at this point, getting us back to potential, getting away from that inflationary gap. Now, explain the cause of the adjustment shown in part B. And this is where it gets a little more wordy, but the short-run aggregate supply curve is going to shift to the left in the long run as sticky wages, or nominal wages, however you want to word that, and input prices eventually increase. Another possible right answer is to say that inflationary expectations will eventually increase, and that will cause the aggregate supply curve to shift to the left as well. Any of those answers would work, but you have to identify the reason why that aggregate supply curve shifts to the left eventually. All right, part C, alternatively, suppose that the government wants to close the output gap using fiscal policy. So now instead of just letting it auto-adjust, we're going to see the government using fiscal policy, taxes, transfer payments, and government spending. So how are we going to get us back to potential GDP? How are we going to get us back to full employment? We're going to use a contractionary fiscal policy. So what could we actually do? We could increase taxes. We could cut government spending or cut transfer payments. And that would shift that aggregate demand curve to the left and get us back to potential GDP, back to full employment. Now, how will the fiscal policy action identified in part C affect the following? The unemployment rate. If we're cutting back on real GDP is declining here, unemployment is going to go up. All right. Another key thing to look at in this question is make sure that you're identifying whether it says unemployment or employment. They like to use those interchangeably, but they have different answers. So make sure you take one more second just to look and make sure that you're answering based on the question that they're asking you. Now, the natural rate of employment is the next part. How will the natural rate be affected? It's not going to change at all. Our natural rate of unemployment is 4 to 6%. It's not changing unless the government or one of our bureaucracies decides that it's going to change. All right, finally, in closing the output gap, will the automatic adjustment identified in Part B produce a higher or lower or the same price level compared to the fiscal policy identified in Part C? Now, that's a mouthful of a question right there, but what it's asking us is the fiscal policy as we see in the graph right now, it dropped the price level. All right, jump back to the graph from before from the auto adjustment. In this case, it increased the price level. So they're asking, will the automatic adjustment produce a higher, lower, or the same price level compared to that fiscal policy? So in this case, we know the auto adjustment is shifting aggregate supply to the left. It's causing a higher price level than the decline in aggregate demand from the fiscal policy. So there's a higher level from the auto adjustment than there is in the fiscal policy. All right, Part D. Draw a correctly labeled graph of the market for loanable funds. Show the effect of the fiscal policy action identified in Part C on the equilibrium interest rate. All right, now, loanable funds market, you want to have your demand for loanable funds, D of LF, S of LF, and you're going to want to have your vertical axis with the real interest rates labels. You got to have that real on the loanable funds. On the money market, you can just have interest rates, but on the loanable funds, you got to have real interest rates. And on the horizontal axis, you got the quantity of loanable funds. All right, now, so we've got our model here. Now we want to show the effect of the fiscal policy action identified in Part C of the equilibrium interest rate. So if the government engages in contractionary fiscal policy, they're either spending less or taxing more or sending out less transfer payments. Any one of those policies is going to reduce the amount of money the government needs. It's either going to say that they are going away from deficit spending, so they're going to be borrowing less. So it could be a demand for loanable funds decreasing. The government's borrowing less to spend less. So the alternative answer here is that the government had a balanced budget or had a surplus, and the extra tax dollars or the less spending causes them to have more savings. And that would increase the supply of loanable funds. But either one of these outcomes causes a lower interest rate, a lower real interest rate in the market. Now the next question says, given the interest rate change identified in Part D, will the long-run aggregate supply curve shift to the right, left, or remain the same in the long run? And explain. So this has to do with the long-run impact in the concept of economic growth. When interest rates drop, investment spending is going to increase. As investment spending increases, the capital stock is going to increase as well. When our capital stock increases, that means that there's going to be economic growth and potential GDP will shift to the right. Long-run aggregate supply will shift to the right. If you were illustrating this on a production possibility frontier, that would shift outward in one way or the other. All right, more capital stock means we can produce more. All right, so that sums it up for that question. I think we've got all the points there. Just keep in mind, I am doing a lot of these FRQ practice. These are the College Board practice questions or the old test questions that are available to you guys. So I like to go over these just to give you some idea of how to answer these questions and the reasons behind it. Okay, I know you guys can get the answers from the College Board website, but listen to these videos, make sure that you're understanding why you're doing it, because you're not going to see the exact same question this year. You're going to see something slightly different, but a lot of these concepts will come up again and again and again, and I'm giving you the right way to answer them. So until next time, guys, take care.